Thank you, Dan. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar entitled General Guidance on Bridging Pesticide Risk Assessments. My name is Mario Yarto, Agricultural Officer at FAO, and I am very pleased to open this session and welcome you on behalf of the Rotterdam Convention Secretariat. I hope that you and your families are all well and in good health, wherever you are. It is indeed great to see that we have quite a large audience online with participants from all over the world. We are joined today by Mr. Donald Ward, who is an international expert on pesticides registration and management, and who will deliver the presentation on the bridging guidance. Also joining us are my colleagues, Ms. Beatrice Renier and Ms. Eva Goldschmidt from the Pest and Pesticides Management team at FAO, who will moderate the Q&A session later on. I also want to thank my colleague Dan from the BRS Secretariat in Geneva for his technical support to facilitate the webinar and for keeping us connected throughout the session. The objective of today's webinar is to introduce the concept of bridging in the context of the Rotterdam Convention and the bridging guidance under the FAO Pesticide Registration Toolkit, which contains detailed supporting information on how bridging can be done successfully and therefore reduce the workload on decision makers in the context of pesticides management and Rotterdam Convention obligations. I would like to underline that this webinar is one of many activities organized and delivered by the Secretariat through the Rotterdam Convention's Technical Assistance Program. Technical assistance is provided upon request and according to the specific needs of parties and delivered through face-to-face and online training. Information on ongoing and past technical assistance activities is available on the Convention's website. Again, welcome to the session and thank you for taking time out and being here today. And now I give the floor to our presenter, Donald Ward. Over to you, Donald.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me clearly at the moment. I'll try to speak as clearly as I can throughout the presentation, and please forgive me, there's a lot of information to cover, and this won't give you all the information you need on how to do a bridging assessment, but it will give you some information about where you can find information within the Pesticide Registration Toolkit to help you understand how you can do a bridging assessment of various kinds and what information is available to you through the FAO Registration Toolkit. So I would suggest that, in your own time, you go and have a good look at the Registration Toolkit. And as I go through this presentation, I'll be showing you various parts of the toolkit and where aspects of bridging support can be found. So in this initial part of the discussion, I'll be talking a little bit about what the toolkit looks like. And you can see here, this is the home page, and that you can see the home is lit up, and there's several boxes of different areas that you can click on that provide even more information. So the FAO provides support for pesticide registration through a number of ways. We help develop guidance documents on pesticide registration, and there are a number of guidelines that have been published, but these maybe are not so easy to use, maybe they're a little bit not so friendly for users, and they're not very interactive. It's just published documents and you have to read through, and it doesn't necessarily give you direct links. So now that things are on the web, it might be a little bit easier to use the toolkit, and we've been working on the toolkit for quite some time now. But the objectives of the toolkit are to make that existing information available to you very quickly. Sometimes it's hard for registrars to find things very fast, and the toolkit brings a lot of things together. It also helps provide you guidance about some procedures and methods. And again, it helps you as a registrar, make those informed decisions. And it also provides an opportunity now for the FAO and the people who've been helping make the toolkit provide training and capacity building. And that's something that I've done several times in places. And we usually take maybe a week to go over how to use the toolkit, because it does have a lot of features for various different things that registrars and people dealing with pesticides management have to do. So the toolkit is really a decision support system. It's to help you in making your decisions. It doesn't make the decision for you. So it's a web-based handbook. And it is very good for day-to-day use. If you need to find out about a registration in another country, it provides a lot of links. Or if you need to find a bit more information about how to go about doing a registration, it can help you there as well. And it's trying to provide that support and those methods for those registrars who have limited resources and limited time. So it tries to help you to the degree of the resources you have available to you. And what it doesn't do is it's not an automated system. So you really can't punch in information about the product you want to register or you want to assess. It won't just give you an answer. You still need to do the evaluation yourself. So the toolkit is really focused on bringing all the relevant information that we can gather from all across the world about the various aspects of chemical registration, chemical assessment in one place. And it also provides a level of guidance to help you understand how you might use those tools. So I think maybe I'm going a little bit quickly. I'll try to slow down a little bit. So the main elements of the toolkit are, across that top line. We've broken it down into registration tools. So there's a lot of technical advice. We've also got a list of information sources. So where you might go to find information about whether or not a pesticide is registered in other countries, or information provided from the FAO on various things. And there's also special topics such as highly hazardous pesticides and public health pesticides. And now there is also news and information about training and a quick start guide, as well as the ability to search through the toolkit. And I'll talk about some of the different information that's included in some of these parts of the toolkit, but I won't talk about sort of all of it. So within the registration tools, this provides information about processes and procedures, and it can provide advice on what registration strategy to follow, including bridging. And it provides advice on steps in the process, the registration process. It also provides you information about what data might be required and testing guidelines for the evaluation of specific types of pesticides, or even for particular uses. These assessment methods also vary for the various aspects of the registration dossier, depending on what information you have and what resources you have to bring to bear. And it also provides information about risk mitigation measures and advice on how you can make decisions and those principles and procedures you might use. So there's a lot of information under the registration tools section. And again, there's the information sources. Those are links to many databases and many websites. And I use this on a daily basis myself in some of my work. So if I want to find out if something has been reviewed recently in, for example, Canada or Australia or somewhere else, I can quickly go and find the links to those registrars' websites and see what they've done. And I can also find links to the international conventions and what products have been restricted or banned. And there's a wide range of information that you can use to help you in your decision-making activities. And these are all pesticide specific. But again, there's a lot of information there, and you may not have time to sort of go through all of it, but it might help if you sort of get familiar with how the information is being portrayed, because there is quite a wealth of information that's available to you. And some of it, once you get to know how to find things, can help you very quickly respond to issues that you may be dealing with. So it's all there in one place for you. And just briefly, there's a section that deals with those high interest topics. So a lot of us might be dealing with how to manage highly hazardous pesticides. So there's lots of information there. There's also information about how to register public health pesticides. And there will be new topics coming on board as they become relevant. And I've added a picture here about an FAO document that's been published about addressing highly hazardous pesticides in Mozambique. I think this is one of the best documents I've seen from the FAO on how Mozambique dealt with this issue. So I would recommend that, if you're interested in having a look. It's not a very large document. It's very concise. It's very well written. And it goes through the process of how they dealt with highly hazardous pesticides. And that's something that I've helped some countries in training about how to do that assessment. And that can take some time as well, but it might be worth having a look at that if you're interested in those sorts of things. So now that's a lot about the toolkit already, so now we'll start to move into how the toolkit can be used to help you with a bridging exercise. So information and guidance on bridging can be found in the registration strategy. So that's in the registration tools section of the toolbox. And you can see at the top there is the registration strategies. But it can also be, information can also be found in the assessment methods of the tools, and that's a little bit lower. So the registration strategies include a range of approaches, including bridging. We'll look at those now. So when you look at the registration strategy section of the toolkit, there's a lot more information present in that part of the toolkit, but I've picked one graphic that's available so we can discuss sort of the basic approach of the toolkit. So there are lots of registration strategies. There's strategies that go from very basic, with where you have minimal resources, to things that are very comprehensive, where you have a lot of resources. And again, the complexities go from low to high, and the data requirements can go from having very little data to having a lot of data. And with regards to bridging, that is really based on your rationalization of the resources that you have available to you. So that's one kind of registration strategy, that you're going to use a bridging approach. You're going to look at a reference country or countries and bridge that registration to your own decision. And that will help you use what resources you have. It won't be as comprehensive as doing the entire assessment yourself with all the data, but it's not the very bottom. It's not the most basic assessment you can do. So you're sort of making benefit of those who've already gone before you. So this is just trying to describe how bridging sort of fits in the various registration strategies that the toolbox helps you go through. So again, the toolbox is set up to try to help people go from the very basic to the most comprehensive and describe how those activities occur within the registration system. So again, now bridging risk assessments, this is an activity that we refer to when an existing risk assessment has been conducted by, we say, a reputable body and is reviewed, but you're using a registration either in another country or maybe a regional registration, and you're comparing it to your local situation. And then you're going to draw a conclusion under your legislation or your system of registration to make a decision about the risk that you will see when it's used in your local area. So again, we use terms such as the reference assessment. So what assessment are you referring to when you bridge to the conditions of use in your region or your local situation? Again, this is sort of reinforcing that you don't want to reinvent the wheel. A lot of these assessments have already been done by well-resourced regulatory authorities who've evaluated, in some cases, the full package of data. And that use pattern may be exactly the same as you're seeing in your local situation. And in fact, a lot of the environmental risks might be exactly the same in your local situation. So remember, some countries like Australia have a very wide range of climatic environments where they use pesticides in. So they would have tropical and subtropical way in the north where they're using products on sugarcane, but they can also have temperate way down in the south. So, and the same with the U.S. They have a wide range of climatic zones that they're dealing with. So you might see that the environmental situations have been assessed to some degree in those countries, and it might match yours. But there are also problems that might arise with you trying to use a bridging approach, because the data that you get is not always exactly the same. And what you want to try to do in looking at your bridging is determine whether or not bridging is going to work for you, or if only part of a bridging assessment will work for you. So within the toolkit, there's several places that provide guidance on how to do a bridging risk assessment. There's a general guidance on bridging of pesticide risk assessments, which I think you've all been given as part of the email with regards to this webinar. And that's provided in the toolkit. It's also based partly on the CRC guidance. So you'll see the general guidance when you go through the toolkit, and that text is also throughout parts of the toolkit. There are also subject-specific bridging support within the toolkit. So there's an operator risk assessment, a bridging assessment. There's also a bridging assessment for worker risks and dietary and honeybee, and there will be more coming. So when we provide training on how to use the toolkit, we'll often spend a day going through how you can go do a bridging assessment. And we would use the example of an operator risk assessment and take people through how they do that. So I won't be able to do that with you here now because it does take some time to take you through each step and to do examples of how to do that bridging assessment for operator risk assessment. But I can start to show you where you might find the tools within the toolkit to help you do that on your own, to give you some assistance there. But I'll give you a bit of an overview about how bridging assessments can work. Now, within the Pesticide Registration Toolkit, again, under the registration tools, there's the assessment methods. And I've clicked on the assessment methods. And there's two places that you can look there. There's the make a selection, and that helps you quite specifically find a selection for the kind of pesticide you're looking at and the kind of assessment you want. But you can also list all the methods. And this is quite handy to look at all the assessment methods assistance that are available for you. So when we click on that, I'm sorry. I think there might be a slide out of order, but that's all right. Let me just go one more. Oh, I'm sorry. When you click on that that box, it'll list all those bridging assessment sort of instructions that are available for you in the toolkit. But this diagram is from the general instructions, and it's about the process for going through and doing a bridging assessment. So it's basically three sections, if you want to consider it as sort of tasks or groups of tasks, where you first start to prepare your information. So you first need to get the information from your local situation. So what is the product? What is its active ingredient and the concentration? What use pattern are you going to see and that sort of information? Then you need to find a risk assessment, a reference risk assessment. So can you go into the toolbox and find another country or another region who has registered this same product in a similar crop or a similar use assessment? And then once you've found those things, you can start to put together a case description. And this can be a very simple, maybe 1, 2, or 3 page comparison of the information that you've found about the various aspects of the pesticide you want to consider. So once you have that all in one place, then you can go through and start comparing the information that you've gathered. So you can compare the products, you can look at the active ingredients, you can start to compare the hazards, and you can compare the exposure that you might see because of the use patterns. And you might also then look at comparing the risk mitigation. So what PP is the reference country proposing that be used with this registered product? Is that the same as the PP that's available to you? So once you've prepared that information, got that case description, and started making those comparisons, you then need to decide whether bridging is possible. Is the information too different for you to go ahead with bridging in one part, or even entirely? Is it just too different? And once you've decided that yes, maybe the information is enough there for you to start to bridge, then you assess your local risks against the reference risks. So you become a bit more focused on those comparisons you've made. You've looked at all the hazards and exposures together and the risk mitigations that you're going to be able to employ, and you assess that. And then finally, you judge, is that going to be acceptable for of your local risk, the things that you'll see in your country for those uses. They're quite particular to what you need to do. And I'll go through each part of this in a little bit more detail throughout the rest of the presentation and try to focus on how the toolkit helps you manage each of these parts of a bridging assessment. So with regards to preparing information, so this is when you compile that data about your local case. So you've got an application before you and you know what the product is and what the use pattern is going to be. And the toolkit provides a link to an assessment summary table, and I'll show you that next. And this helps you compile that data very quickly and without wasting a lot of time, and it's also is very concise. You also need to find that reference risk assessments, and the toolkit has links to many regulators and other agencies that have published risk assessments and other information about scientific reviews. So you can go to those websites quite quickly and then do searches and find information about that active ingredient or that product or those reviews. And once you've got that information, you start to put it together in your case description. You don't need to use the assessment summary. It's just that we've found that the assessment summary tables is a very quick and easy way to start putting that information together fast so that you can make a decision without wasting a lot of time. But you can use your own assessment summaries if that's what's required for your regulatory situation. But again, the case description just needs to summarize the important information that's compared in the next steps. And it might also highlight if you've missed any information or if the agency that's conducted the reference assessment doesn't have for you. So this slide just shows a portion of the assessment summary table, and this one specifically for bridging an existing operator risk assessment, but they all look very similar. There's just some very basic information about the product name and formulation, its ingredient, maybe a registration file number, and then you've got the bulk of the assessment just provides that existing risk assessment, the reference risk assessment, and you can have more than one. That might be very helpful as well to have more than one reference. But to keep it simple, at the moment, it's just got one existing risk assessment. So you put the information for the risk assessment that you're using as a reference to bridge, and then alongside it, you put your local situation that you're reviewing, and then you've got a place for comments to talk about what differences are seen here, or what issues you might have with regards to each part of the information that you're assessing as part of the bridging. And there's only about another, these come in about 2 or 3 pages. They're not very long, they're very succinct, and you can find pretty much all links to the information throughout the various regulators. You might not be able to find all the information, but you can find a large amount of information to help you in this bridging activity. So again, these documents are available through links in the toolkit itself for each of those bridging assessment methods. They'll have that in their instructions. Now, you need to then start comparing the information. When you compare the pesticide products, you look at the active ingredients. Is it the same active ingredient? And there can be differences in active ingredient depending on maybe where they're manufactured. Their location of manufacture can sometimes bring in issues with regards to toxicological concerns. You also need to look at the ingredient concentration. The toolbox also provides a table that sort of describes how large a difference in a concentration might be significant to you. You also need to consider something like formulation type and the composition of the product. Is it coming in a different format from the reference product? You then can go on to compare the hazards, and these are hazards to human health and hazards to environment. So that's a lot of information there, and there are many links within the information part of the toolkit to take you to several sources for hazards about human health and hazards about the environment, which once you become familiar with can become quite easy and quick for you to navigate and find that information. And finally, I've combined sort of two of the other parts of the comparing the exposures and the risk mitigation measures, because to my mind, they sort of go together. So how is that product being used? We're talking about the exposure. Which crops is it being used in and how long and what type of applications? And is the PP approved in the reference? Is that something that you've got available to you locally? Because quite often countries might approve a product for use maybe only in a closed system or a closed cabin application technology that you might not have access to. So this is about comparing that information. And again, a little bit more detailed about what you're thinking about when you're comparing these pesticides. So is it, the more similar the pesticide, the better you're going to have a chance at bridging. For me, I would be most comfortable when I'm dealing with an identical formulation. That's very easy. You know that the bridging is going to be easy. You know the precision is going to be much higher when you're dealing with the identical formulation and the identical technical grade actives. But the further you go away from being identical and you're just similar, but maybe the active is identical, well, that's good. But then if you start to go further and further and have active ingredients of very dissimilar concentrations, or even have a very different formulation, because some of the co-formulants can bring concerns of toxicity into the equation, I would become less confident in the ability to bridge. but you should be able to make these comparisons relatively quickly. This is not too hard to do with regards to the concentrations. The formulation can be a little bit more difficult, and sometimes that deals with regards to the dermal absorption issues. And you can also find that in certain places through the toolkit as well. With regards to comparing to hazards, the toolkit has information sections specifically on finding hazard information. So we've got hazard classification documents for like the GHS and hazard classification from the WHO, that new document that was just put out in 2019, which I'll show you later. There's also links where you can find toxicological reference values for pesticides, as well as areas of finding acceptable operator exposure levels and examples of how those models are used to find out what those operator exposures are. And when we provide training in doing an operator bridging exercise, this is something we also do. The information can also take you to databases of ecotox reference values for chemicals and pesticides. Now, comparing environmental hazards might be difficult, but some regulators cover a wide range of zones. And I understand that the first tier ecotox data tends to provide protection to a relatively large range of organisms. So I'm not an ecotoxicologist, but I'll have to take their word on that one. I can see how that could work, but that's one of the few things I haven't done is ecotox. But that information is available to you. Now again, so here within the toolkit is where those sources of hazard information can be found. So this is in the hazard classification. So I've clicked on that, and that opens up a number of links to, again, the GHS, the most recent version of that, and the WHO for pesticide hazards, also the IARC, and a number of other databases, including the EU pesticides database, and there's even more. I've cut off a little bit here, but there's quite a lot of information, and those links go straight out, and they tell you, are pesticides classified, or is it GHS compatible? So, for example, in the GHS classification, they give you a wide range of health aspects. And this is one of the most recent versions, so it's been being updated routinely, this GHS approach. Again, so these are the sorts of things that you would be looking for when filling out your information for your bridging comparison. And also the WHO has its hazard classification link. So this is the latest version of that, the 2019 version. And this classification by WHO focuses mainly on the acute risk to human health, but they can also have some chronic toxicity if that data was available to them and were reviewed at the WHO. And again, it takes consideration of the tox of that technical active. So when you have actives that are the same, it makes it a lot easier to use this hazard classification for the bridging. But it also describes methods for classification of formulation. So it's not just the active ingredient, but they can talk you through how you might do a calculation for a formulation. It's a little bit more involved, might take some more resources and time, but they do provide you information about how to do that. And it also lists pesticides subject to prior informed consent procedures, so the Rotterdam Convention, and the limitation to trade because of the Stockholm Convention, the POPs. So this is a very, very information-rich document that you can find through the toolkit that can help you find information you need to compare the toxicology, the hazard, of the products you want to compare. Now, with regards to exposure, it's very likely that you'll see different levels of exposure in your region compared to others. So in this picture, we see that the PPE maybe that was approved in one country is requiring that the use of looks to be a face shield and full body covering with gloves and maybe boots, whereas in the more developing nations, that PPE is not going to be available. So would you be confident, would you be comfortable in making that assessment if you don't have the PPE available to provide the protection to those workers and their families? So again, I think that this is one of the more important aspects of a bridging exercise is comparing those exposures. And we've, again, the FAO has provided training to groups of countries about how to use the toolbox and how to go through and do that operator exposure assessment and do it several times. We'll provide you with a a fully completed assessment and then let you work through the steps with assessments that have been completed part way, and then ultimately down to none where you have to do it yourself. So do that in groups, and it's quite a good activity to sort of let us engage with you and show you some of the things to be aware of when you're doing that comparison. So again, there's a lot of key parameters with regards to exposure that you need to look at. And these are part of those assessment documents, those assessment summaries I showed you before. And it's about that, looking at that good agricultural practice. So what are the crops that's been approved for use in the reference country as well as your own country? What methods and equipment are approved in the reference country? So for example, I've got a picture of aerial application here. An aerial application is quite often approved in Australia. And to me, that says if aerial application is still approved, that might actually be a relatively safe product, because the mixer and loader for aerial applications often encounters a large amount of active ingredient in their work, particularly in Australia, where they might be spraying throughout the year for a very long time as they go up and down the growing cycle. So that kind of information is a little bit maybe not as apparent to people, that because aerial approved, it might, as the operator exposure, it might actually be a little bit less risky, if I'll use that term. But you also need to look at those dose rates. So is the dose rate, or the grams of active per hectare, is it the same in your country as it has been approved overseas? And again, that application volume, the frequency of application. So how many times per year is this going to be applied? How many times per day? How many hours is somebody going to be working with the chemical per day? And then how many hectares could they be expected to manage? So again, those aerial applicators will be going through lots and lots of chemicals. And can you do a quantitative assessment looking at dose rates, or do you need to do a qualitative comparison with regards to something like PPE? So again, those are sort of the major sort of parameters you might look at with regards to exposure and doing that assessment. And with regards to risk mitigation, the toolkit has a section about risk mitigation. It includes some extra tools to help you. It's got a feasibility check tool, a spreadsheet that you can go into and click information. It sort of steps you through some of the process. And it also has an inventory of mitigation methods. So it's just sort of a list of things that could help with regards to mitigating the risks. It might be interesting for you to have a bit of a look at that. So when you're doing that comparison, you'll look at PPE during mixing and loading. Again, that's very critical for air, that those people are encountering a lot of the active ingredient have the PPE to mitigate those risks, and also PPE during application. And there might be other protective measures. So again, is the reference only approved for use in closed cabins, or only approved in closed systems for mixing and loading? Sometimes that's something you have to find on the label in the approved country. And again, we might be talking about adherence to PPE rotation schedules. And there could also be a restriction with regards to the use of the chemical, with regards to what kind of training is available or experience of the operator. So in Australia, we might control access to certain chemicals that require a license to get access to that chemical, because we think it's a more dangerous chemical. So that would be listed on the label through something we call schedule. But other countries would also maybe identify that you need a license to gain access to this, and that's how they try to mitigate that risk, to make sure that the people using it are well trained. So that was all about the comparison of things. So now is when you need to start thinking on your own and making that decision about, are there differences between that local situation and the reference situation that rules out a comparison of risks? Is the use patterns drastically different to what's being approved in the reference country? Is the exposure just going to be too much to mitigate? Are there concerns about the chemical or the formulation differences? So is the local product that they're giving you have an active ingredient that's a very different concentration, or comes in a different form from the reference product that you see? Or is it possible that you can use part of the reference risk assessment? So you might not be able to use to bridge the entire assessment, but maybe you can do part. So maybe if the product and the use patterns are identical, maybe you can consider bridging the residue side, but that the risk mitigation measures might not be something that you can do as a bridge, but maybe you can just do that assessment on your own. So those are decisions that you have to make. But if you think that you have got a product that's very similar, use patterns are similar, the crops are similar, and you think that the information you have is going to allow you to go ahead and do it, then you'll decide to continue to bridge, and you can assess that risk in your situation. So now it's up to you to look at the risks and make those decisions about whether or not you're going to make a final regulatory action and decide under your legislation that yes, the information from the reference is such that I can confidently say that the risk is either acceptable or unacceptable in your assessment. So you're going to weigh all the evidence of those parts of the case. And again, some aspects of it can be quantitative and some of it can be qualitative. Again, you can be looking at the application rates and they're numerical, and you can say, well, if the application rate is close enough, then you're happy. And then the qualitative questions can be that maybe you do have PP that's the same, or maybe you can't have that PP. So it's easy to sort of do a yes/no for some of those things. But you're the judge of whether the risk in your local situation is likely to be lower, similar, or higher than that reference assessment. And that's really what you're looking to come down to. So we get sort of to the end. You've done your bridging, and you now need to judge whether that risk in the local situation can be considered acceptable. And I actually think that it's easy for those situations where it's red or green, because it's kind of easy to say that, yep, if your local risk is higher and it's already not acceptable in your reference country, then it's not going to be acceptable in your situation. And conversely, if the risk is acceptable in your reference country and it's similar to where you've got it, or it's lower, then it's probably going to be less. So that's easy. But when you've got a situation where the risk could be higher in your situation, but they've deemed it to be acceptable, it's a little bit unclear. So maybe you might want to do some more assessment in your local situation. The same with it being not acceptable in your reference, but you having a lower risk. Again, it's not always clear that that's still acceptable because of some of the vagaries of using a bridging approach. So just be mindful about sort of those situations. I think those are they're harder for you as a registrar to make. And now we're sort of getting towards the end. So the toolkit can help you in pesticide registration decisions. And it might be that you found that the risks are not acceptable, and you maybe will not register, or that you might even restrict that product use in your country. And this can help in being the notification for a final regulatory action to ban or severely restrict a pesticide that you can then inform to Rotterdam Convention. And again, the toolkit is trying to provide you with those links and that instruction and that help that you might need to make that bridging assessment and make an assessment that's science-based. You're using information from other regulators that you've deemed to be relevant for your bridging assessment under your legislation. So you need to be confident that you can make that decision, and that can be something that can be supported by your legislation, and then can go forward with regards to your other engagements in the treaty conventions. Just about done. I think this is the last slide. So these are just some linkages between the Rotterdam Convention and the toolkit, and it's just really just how they cross over between each other. So the toolkit provides links to Rotterdam and various things, and Rotterdam provides linkages back to the toolkit. So they are sort of wedded together. And I'm starting to see some questions pop up in the chat now, but that was the presentation that I had for you today, and we're just on 41 minutes. So my apologies if that was very quick. I know it was a lot of information, but we sort of have gotten through it, and I'll try to answer some of the questions for you if I
can. Thank you very much, Donald, for this really great presentation. And my name is Eva Kohlschmidt, and I'm together with my colleague Beatrice Prenet. I will facilitate the question and answer section. And as Dan already has told you at the beginning of the webinar, that if you want to raise your hand or if you want to say something, and click on this little hand button in the participants list, then I can see it. And as Donald also mentioned, there have been already questions raised in the question and answer section. So maybe we start with this one. And the first question was from Aita about comparison basis on what references. And I would like to give the floor to Donald.
Well, so you're looking at a reference of a registration in another country or a regional registration. So, for example, if I were helping my friends in if I was a registrar somewhere and I needed to look at a new product application that's before me, I might go and see if there's a similar product registered in Australia or if there's a product registered in Canada or some other location, just through links in the toolkit that go straight to those registrars. And I can search for the product by product name in some places or by active ingredient. And that would give me a lot of information about, did they register this exact same product that I'm looking at or a very similar product? And I can start to use those references. You can also look at reviews of chemicals. So have they reviewed the chemical active for any concerns about human health of the environment? So you can find those in the information sections. So the references that we refer to about the bridging is usually looking at, is it registered somewhere else? And if I might just go to the next question, is that okay? And just deal with the ones that are in chat now, or how do you want to deal with this, Eva?
Yes, yes, it's okay. If you have them, then please go ahead, Donald.
Yep, so there's a couple ones I can probably deal with quickly. So is the toolkit only about active ingredients and pesticides? Well, not really only about active ingredients. It tries to give you information about the registration process, and that can sometimes also go to the formulations. A lot of the information that you'll find can be about hazard information that's specific to actives, but you can find registration information about formulated products. So it does cover both things. So yes, the next question is, would you need risk assessment information for comparison with similar references? Yes, so you need that risk assessment information. And sometimes you can infer a lot of information from the information that's available on the websites, but you may also get a contact details for that registrar. If you want to send him a question, maybe they can help you. It depends on their abilities to do that. With regards to bridging environmental risk assessments, I think that there are some environmental databases in the information section. I think there's a European database that has a lot of environmental hazard information, and I think there's a UK database as well that has quite a lot of environmental information, including soil information as well. But I would just sort of familiarize yourself with the information sort of links within those information section. And you will find some websites are easier to use and have information that's very quick to find, and other websites it's a little bit harder to find that information. So it really depends on how well you're versed at sometimes navigating those countries' websites. And now a question about a reference to compare with, mostly if your goal is to establish some restrictions. So this is a little bit difficult in that you can look for reviews of pesticides, and that's usually by the active ingredient. And sometimes those reviews include a number of products. So for example, on the Australian website, you can go to their review page and they list everything alphabetically with regards to the actives that they've reviewed, and you can look at their review reports and see which reviews they've done. And that might be one source with regards to if you're considering restricting a pesticide. In other aspects, if you went to a registration site and you typed in the active and you didn't find any actives approved for that country, that might indicate that, depending on the registration system, that they've maybe had a lot of companies withdraw the product before they made a final decision. It's sometimes a little bit unclear. So the easiest place is to probably look at the reviews, the chemical reviews of those active ingredients. But it is a little bit harder to do for some products. So occasionally Australia will look at specific use patterns. So they may restrict specific use patterns in a review of a chemical product. So I think that covers most of the questions.
Donald, there are two more questions coming in. One is about what do you think, will it be possible for every country to do the proper risk assessment?
When you say proper, do you mean, we've described that there's a range of things. So if I was just one man, and a lot of registrars are only doing sometimes the pesticide registration as part-time work, how much resource can I put towards doing an assessment? I've done assessments in Australia, and it's a very complicated thing to try to do all aspects of a pesticide registration assessment or a review. It takes a very long time. But I can rely upon those people in other countries that, they've spend a lot of time and effort, particularly if the product is exactly the same. I think I would be comfortable in using a bridging assessment from a reference product if I was doing an assessment, if it was the same. So when you say proper assessment, I think I would feel very comfortable depending on what the information comparison was like. The same could be said with regards to a review. If a review is finding that there's strong concerns about the environmental risks posed by the use of some products or the human health risks posed by a product, if they've put that entire review up on the website and it's available for me, I think I could make a regulatory decision under my legislation that could be defended. I think that's sometimes the important part. It can be relied upon by others.
And there's another one. This toolkit can be used for all categories of chemical products.
I would have to. There are aspects of assessments that sort of go beyond just pesticides, but it is focused primarily on pesticide registration. So you can go through, and when you click through to find the assessment methodology, I think you can click on things that are subtly different classes of pesticides, and I think even chemicals, but it's not really, the focus is not really for other products.
Yeah, this is Beatrice Grenier from FAO as well. May I come in? Now, just to complete what you were saying about the toolkit and whether it's used for all categories of chemicals. I mean, it's definitely about pesticides. At the moment, there's more information. I mean, it's all about the processes and principles behind assessment. And at the moment, when you do the search, I mean, it's mostly focusing on chemical pesticides, but we are working to add information about biological pesticides. So in the coming year, there will be more information about how to assess biological pesticides. I mean, the thing is, as Donald was explaining at the beginning, we have the information in guidelines, so on paper, basically. I mean, it's all the documents are published as well on the FAO website. The thing is, we need to insert this information into the toolkit so that it's more user-friendly in the end. So that's the situation at the moment. But I would say the toolkit it's evolving. I mean, we improve it all the time. We're adding new topic for risk assessment. I mean, Eva right now is working on adding information on soil risk assessment. So we keep updating the toolkit. And something I wanted to add, because I was, I mean, one word you used a lot, Donald, in your presentation is confidence. And I think it's also a lot to do with being confident with the reference risk assessment you're using. It's also being confident in, I mean, knowing the people. I mean, you said you can find information on the web because some risk assessments are available on some websites, but it's also good to know to contact your peer in the other countries, and that's what I mean. Also, is that as the FAO, we encourage those kind of intra-country contacts, and we encourage regional collaboration as much as possible. And to finish with that, is that in the toolkit, I mean, if you are a registrar, you can also join. There's a forum in the toolkit. If you go to the toolkit website, you will see there's a tab which indicates, I think it's discussion group forum, and you're welcome to join that because we've just set it up, I mean, a few months ago. So we are trying to encourage people to post questions on that forum so that you can, as registrar, and you have an issue, you can post a question and exchange about your problems or about your questions on how, which, for example, I mean, this kind of question, what reference country would you use in such a case, or for that kind of bridging, for this kind of bridging. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Bea. Yeah, please raise your hand if you have more questions, or also post it on the chat section. And I have a question for Liliana Tovar. Did we answer your question? I'm not clear. I'm sorry. It's not clear for me how to choose a reference to compare with, mostly if your goal is to establish some restrictions for pesticides. Would you just let us know if the answer to this one?
Yes, so I think I would direct you to those scientific reviews, the reviews of pesticides done by some of the other regulators. So you might then get information about what were their concerns, about why did they start the review, were there any problems that they noticed about human health, or were there any problems with regards to damage of the environment. So I would look at that first if you're more concerned about an existing product that you've got concerns about, or if you're because again we use the bridging sort of example mostly for regards to registrars who have to do a registration because someone's making an application and they don't have a lot of time or resource to do a full assessment, but they want to be able to do as much as they can with the resources they have. So it's a little bit turned around when you try to maybe make a decision on another part of your legislation about restrictions, but it can be done. So it is about making those comparisons about you found that one country has made specific changes or taken actions with regards to an active ingredient or products for specific reasons. Then you can look at why they did that, what information they had. Is it comparable to what product you're seeing and what use patterns you're seeing? Biological products aren't really being covered as fully as the older pesticides at the moment, but as Beatrice said, there's more information coming. So when you go to look at those assessment methods in the toolkit, you can click on, there are several pesticide types, and that includes botanicals and biologicals, but there's not a lot of assessment information right now. That'll be coming later. But I do believe that there's some guidance available elsewhere. Beatrice, is there guidance from WGP?
Yes, there is guidance also for.
Yeah, there's at least the FAO WHO has published 2 years ago a guidance on biological products. As I said, for now it's guidance as a paper guidance, but that can be downloaded from the FAO website. So this is available, and of course OECD has developed a lot of guidance on biological products, whether it's microbials or pheromones or botanicals, also in coordination. I mean, I would say I don't know whether it's the right word, but keeping in harmonize as much as possible with what it's done in the European Union as well. So we make sure that we harmonize between the international organizations. But that part on biological product is not yet included in the toolkit, but will be done soon.
Okay, we have 2 minutes left. If there's some urgent questions, please raise your hand or post it now.
If I might make a comment, again, this presentation is just giving you a brief glimpse about the resources that are available to the toolkit. We usually take an entire week to really go through all aspects of the toolkit and go through examples to help you do bridging assessments or look at how the information can be pulled together. So there is so much available to you that I only gave you just a little glimpse about what's there. So you might want to consider, how the FAO might be able to help you do training, or even go into the toolkit itself, because there are lots of YouTube examples that talk you through each part of the toolkit that can be very helpful for you to play over and over again to get sort of a more information from the real experts.
Yeah, no, great, Donald. And also what Beatrice mentioned in the forum of the toolkit, you can register there and also raise questions. And yes, so I think we are close to 11 o'clock at Rome time. So I would again thank everybody for joining and being so actively with the questions. And if you have any further questions, please reach out to us. And I would like to give the floor to Mario for some closing words.
Thank you very much, Eva, and also to Donald and Beatrice for participating in today's session. And thank you everyone for being available to listen to this very important presentation. I just would like to invite you to visit regularly the website of the Rotterdam Convention to see the announcements that we publish when we organize these type of webinars. We try as much as possible to offer them in the 3 official languages for the convention, the other ones being Spanish and French. So you can find that information on the convention's website. Again, thank you for being here today, and I wish you a very nice day, afternoon, or evening, depending where you are. Thank you and goodbye.